Christianity outside of Christ and Him alone for salvation, you see works applied. So there are those that are working their way to heaven. There is lost as someone who is in complete rebellion to God. So you have two states, a working and a rebellion. Now someone who is declared righteous or justified, this born-again person has a peace that the wicked world cannot provide or cannot even take away. It is acceptance or it is peace with God. Now a born-again believer standing before God gives him even more than acceptance. It also gives him access to God. Look at verse 2. Also through Him we have obtained access by faith into this grace in which we stand, and we rejoice in the hope of the glory of God. Now this word access actually means a bringing in, an introduction. But here in our text this morning, chapter 5, it goes beyond that. The thought is that of our acceptance with God and the enjoyment of God's grace as those that God has declared righteous. Now, how much more glorious can it get than to know that you've been accepted by this holy God, to know that you're no longer at war with God, and that no longer does God look at you with disfavor and wrath. But it gets better than that. Can you believe that it actually gets better than that? It is far more glorious to have access to God. And if you've taken the pierced hand of God's great Son, you have access to God. What an awesome fact that because of Christ's finished work, we have acceptance and access to God, leading to a right standing before God, leading to a right relationship before God. So what is our state? I want to preview our state before God. What does it look like? Because of Christ, we have a perfect standing before God. You have a perfect standing. When God declares you right before Him, that doesn't go away. You stand perfect before the Lord because of Christ's perfectness. Now you might say that our state before God is progressive. It's a little different. It's not a perfect standing before God at this point. This will be Paul's theme in the next few verses. Paul presents the theme of what progressive looks like, or maturity in Christ. Now in verse 3, Paul shows how we demonstrate maturity. Verse 3, look at that verse with me. And not only that, but we also rejoice in our afflictions. We rejoice in our afflictions, or difficulties, or tribulations. The cross of Christ and the crown of glory go together. You might say, how does that go together? The cross of Christ, death, suffering, pain, anguish, and the crown of glory, they go together, as well as grief and suffering, or grief and rejoicing, go hand in hand. To rejoice in afflictions, to rejoice in difficulties, tribulations, is a real sign of maturity. Do you see that? How difficult that is to say. I have struggled with that all week. I've thought about that. What it looks like to rejoice when difficulties, that tough situations come into your life. That's not easy, is it? For anyone. For anyone. I don't care how spiritual we might think that we are. It is not easy to deal with difficulties. You may have someone say something that's not true in your life and kind of destroy your character. That's not easy to deal with. You may have the loss of a loved one. You may have medical conditions. All of these things are difficulties that come into our lives. But how we respond to them is the maturity that's coming into our lives. You might ask me how this maturity is attained or cultivated. Maturity is cultivated in the believer. The second part of verse 3 through the first part of verse 5 explains this. Because we know that affliction produces endurance. Affliction produces perseverance, endurance. Endurance produces proven character. And proven character produces hope. This hope does not disappoint. Now this was no blind theory that the apostle came up with. He knew all too well of tribulation and its ability to mature a Christian, to bring a born-again believer into the right maturity before the Lord. Now every day the believer experiences something of the death of Jesus, so that we may then understand the power of the life of Jesus in these bodies of ours. 2 Corinthians chapter 4 verses 8 through 10. 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verses 8 through 10. It says, we are pressured in every way, but not crushed. We are perplexed, but not in despair. We are persecuted, but not abandoned. We are struck down, but not destroyed. We always carry the death of Jesus in our body, so that the life of Jesus may also be revealed in our body. We are pressured in so many ways. You cannot live on this face of this earth and not feel the pressure that comes your way. But God will not allow you to be crushed. We are perplexed. We get perplexed. But we're never to go into open despair. We are persecuted, but we'll never, ever be abandoned by God. Now, God uses affliction, tribulation, difficulties in our life to make us more mature. And of course, all of us know the story of Job and the way that the things that happened to Job. I don't want to go into every detail, but you know the pain and the agony and the distress that came upon him as he lost his family. He lost his servants and his livelihood, his crops and his cattle. All of these things were taken away from him as he fell upon the wrath here that came upon him and all the difficulties in his life. But how did Job respond? Job responded, the Lord gives and the Lord takes away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Think about that. I don't know that Job could have said that before these difficulties came into his life. He didn't really know that. I mean, think about all that he had. I mean, there was so much wealth that Job had. How would he have understood that until these afflictions and these difficulties came into his life? And then he realizes, you know, God has a purpose for all things. And even in those, the Lord is great. The Lord is good. He is awesome. Now, also think about the story of Joseph. What happened to Joseph? Joseph was loved by his father, greatly, greatly loved by his father Jacob. And Jacob loved him so much. And we see what happened in his life as God gave Joseph these dreams. And he had these dreams and he went and presented them to his brothers, which made his brothers very, very jealous of him. And then his father placed this beautiful coat upon his back. And he goes out, and of course this coat represented that he was in charge, that he was kind of the son that was favored. And of course his brothers hated him so much. And they planned to start with to kill him. And of course that changes, and they decide to sell him into slavery. He goes into Egypt, he's in slavery. He ends up in Potiphar's house. It doesn't take long, and Potiphar realizes how wise Joseph is, and he places him in charge of everything there in his house. But it doesn't take long until distress comes into his life.